Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo, the founder of the Transparency Task Force. The Transparency Task Force is a certified social enterprise based in the UK, but we have a community that involves people in 21 countries around the world. There's about 6,300 or so people who get our weekly newsletter, the Transparency Times. And within that community, there's a hard core of individuals who, like me, are working really damn hard to try to get the financial sector to behave the way it should. The financial industry ought to be serving society, not exploiting it. The regulators ought to be doing a better job than they are now. There are simply far too many people experiencing life-changing losses as a consequence of various kinds of malpractice, malfeasance, misconduct, mis-selling, outright fraud and outright criminality. A lot of that is done by outing out criminals. Some of it is done by, for example, major high street banks behaving badly, very bad. Tonight's session, as you can see, is called The Global State of Scams. It's our first event with a very deliberately international perspective of the issue of investment fraud and scams. It's really come about because of the realization over a period of months and years that such a high proportion of investment scams that are causing massive consumer detriment have some kind of an international dimension to them. Now that in and of itself makes things complicated, but frankly, the real issue isn't the fact that the people involved may not all be in the one country. The real issue, as far as I'm concerned, is the grotesque lack of joined up thinking by the authorities. That's really the problem. It's been too easy for various entities, authorities, bodies to simply have that mindset, that kind of slopey shoulders mindset that it's somebody else's problem to deal with. Oh, you're not in the right jurisdiction, so we can't look after you. It doesn't matter that you've lost your entire life savings. So what we are going to do, working collaboratively, is focus attention on that issue and to do all we possibly can to encourage a more cohesive, joined up approach by the authorities. That's what's necessary. And that's really what tonight's session is all about. Now, as a part of that process of encouraging a joined up bit of thinking, I'm going to share my screen, if I may, please, and just draw your attention to the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Personal Banking and Fair and Financial Services. We're going to be hearing about at least 2 APPGs today. This is one of them. This is the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Personal Banking and Fair and Financial Services. It's made up of various UK parliamentarians who have a real interest in this issue of people being served better by the financial sector. If I click on the purpose statement of the APPG, which I'm doing now, we'll be able to read what this all-party parliamentary group's focus is. It's here. I'll read it out in case you can't see it. The type's a bit small. The purpose statement of the APPG on personal banking and fairer financial services is to identify aspects of personal banking and financial services where the service providers or regulators, I'm stressing that bit, or regulators, have not delivered or are not delivering excellence and appropriate consumer protection. To facilitate and encourage all stakeholders to work together to resolve past and present shortcomings and to bring about positive changes. Now that APPG is working hard to deliver some worthwhile end results, and we'll be hearing a little bit more about its work in a short while. But what I'm going to do now is introduce you to a gentleman who I've only known for a couple of months or so, but from our very, very first conversation, it became ever so obvious to me that George Abraham has got a hell of a lot to offer for 2 sets of reasons. George will explain he runs and leads 2 organisations. Both of them are hyper relevant to this space. So can I please invite everybody, first of all, just to put your hands together and to welcome George to speak at his first ever TTF event. Well done, George. Over to you, sir. Please tell everybody about you, your organisations, and why what you do is relevant to our topic tonight. Thank you, John. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy, and thank you very much for having me. I'm going to apologize first. First, I'm Dutch, so I'm not a native English speaker, so please forgive me for offending if not meant so. And secondly, I've got tremendous hay fever, so I'm going to sniffle through my presentation, and I hope you do not mind. Andy, just to double check, is my PowerPoint visible? Yep, super. So Andy was already saying, my name is George Abraham, I'm Dutch, and I run two organizations. The first one is the Global Anti-Scam Alliance, which is a non-profit organization where we bring together law enforcement, consumer protection organizations, policymakers, and of course the commercial sector to share insights around online scams targeting consumers, but also together define solutions on how we can protect consumers better worldwide from scams. And secondly, our consumer brand is called scamadvisor.com. It was actually set up by a developer from the United Kingdom in 2012. He got scammed. He bought a golf set online, which of course we Dutch find very typical for an English person. It proved to be a fake. And as you know, nothing is as dangerous as an angry developer. So he started to develop an algorithm to determine the likelihood of a website being either legit or a scam. And that turned into ScamAdvisor. And in 2018, we took over from him. We modernized the platform, but also started to work together with the FBI, London City Police, Dutch Police, Swiss Police, consumer protection organizations to share data on scammy websites. And nowadays, we have more than 5 million unique visitors per month, checking if a website is legit or a scam. But much more importantly, we also share our data with law enforcement, search engines, social media, antivirus companies to help them protect their users and visitors better. Our goal is very simple. We want to help consumers not get scammed worldwide. And with ScamAdvisor, feel free to go there. You can type in any website, and we immediately do an analysis. And based on our data, we give you an advice. What's the chance of this website being legit or not? It's not perfect, but at least it helps many consumers figure out pretty quickly if it might be some risk involved or not. Taking one step back, maybe what are scams? Scams are a weird kind of crime. It's the only crime you can fall for. And that makes it different, because what we see is that the behavior of people who get scammed is very different from other kinds of crime. One of them is shame and not reporting it, but I will go into that later. And scams are also vague in the sense of where does a scam start and where does bad service end? I mean, if you go to Trustpilot, you will see that Apple and brands like ASOS get terrible reviews, but I think we can still agree to some extent that these companies are not scams, and sometimes they might offer very bad service. How we define scams officially is by characterize it as a use of deception to gain financial data, data or money. We define it also to make it easy. We define it when the gap between the service or product being offered and what's actually being delivered are large. So here you see two examples of what we often get, because we do see scammers often delivering a product just so that they can state to PayPal or your credit card company that, hey, look, I delivered the product. We don't know why the consumer is complaining about it. There are hundreds of different scams. I mean, very honestly, scams started already with the Egyptians, with falsifying monies and asking money for that. But since then, scams have been with us. And we see that the number of scams is growing at a very rapid rate. Of course, in some instances, the victim might have known or could have known better. I mean, if you're trying to buy a verified PayPal account, guns, a driver's license online, you might know that the chances of getting caught or getting scammed are large. And because the scammer knows that you will not go to law enforcement and say, hey, I ordered my visas written online and they did not deliver. Some scams are too incredible you will be amazed that they work, but they do. Recently there was a Japanese lady who paid an astronaut who claimed to be stuck in space, and he needed money to get back to Earth. And the 65-year-old victim had built up a trust relationship with him, and she really believed the story and paid him 35,000 euros. But very honestly, most scams are more difficult to identify. Of course, we see on Facebook many of these kind of scams where a product is offered for a incredible low price, and most of the people do recognize these. But it gets more difficult when the prices become more real. And we see that most of the scams searched on ScamAdvisor are related to online shopping. Is this web shop real? Is it delivering products, or is it selling fakes, for example? The second category of scams we come across are related to investment and cryptocurrency scams. Those are the second largest category. And again, sometimes the scammer exaggerates, and it might be pretty easy to identify, hey, these returns are too good to be true. It might be a scam. On the other hand, we see that scams, especially in the investment area, are becoming very sophisticated. Many of you might be familiar with the Netflix series Squid Game, which was very popular last year. A scammer started a viral marketing campaign launching the Squid Coin and promising people that a game would be developed, and they would, if they now invested, they would have a bargain later on. Within 5 days, the scammer was able to get to convince people to spend $3.4 million with him before Netflix put an end to it and took the website down. But the scam was very sophisticated and very convincing, and Squid Game was very popular. And that's what we see with scammers. They are unfortunately great marketeers. They use any event during the year, just like retailers, to promote their scams. We see it in any crisis, from the masks we saw with Corona to the Ukrainian war. And unfortunately, even with new developments like the death of Queen Elizabeth, we came across scammers which were offering tickets to the front row of the funeral, and people believing it and buying tickets, which of course is not possible. A question we often get is, how big are online scams? And every year we look at 48 different countries and try to determine how many people are being scammed, how much money is lost, and which solutions do governments and other organizations within a country implement to better protect their citizens. And here we see a very sharp rise. We estimate that currently, and this is only reported, so reported to law enforcement, $55 million was lost in scams last year, and nearly 300 million scams were reported. We see that the rise is, however, incredible, and it depends very much per country, also because the quality of data differs very strongly per country. But especially in some developing countries, we see a massive rise, like India, Nigeria, where it used to be that the scammers were operating across the border. Now they're also scamming their own fellow citizens. We see in many countries now that scams are either the #1 most reported type of crime or the second most reported kind of crime. The UK, unfortunately, is #2, with 41% of all crime now reported to law enforcement being related to fraud. Only Singapore reports a higher figure. 50% of all reports to law enforcement in Singapore are now related to online fraud. And it's only the tip of the iceberg, because we know that in many cases people do not report a scam to law enforcement. And our estimate is that on a global scale, only 7% of all scams are reported. Many Western countries have quite a high figure, although Canada is already quite low. but we see in most countries, especially in developing countries, if you try to report a scam, then the answer from law enforcement is, you paid, you should have known better, good luck. And we see that scams are blurring. One of the, in my view, most terrible kinds of scams is what they call pig butchering scams, where a relationship of trust is being built. It can be romantic, it can be friendship, through social media, and the victim is fed up for 3 months, 6 months, and sometimes years. And somewhere in the discussions in the relationship, the scammer says, hey, I invested in this website, in this cryptocurrency website or this investment broker. It worked very well. Why don't you join me? And then the victim is convinced of first spending £50. It works. He even can retrieve his money. Then he invests £500 and he gets a great return on investment and can even retrieve his money. And only when he invests £50,000 or more, then suddenly the website goes down, all the money is gone, and the person the relationship was built with disappears and no longer answers any emails or chats. And it doesn't stop with there. We often see with online shopping scams that once the victim has ordered, he gets an email, hey, you ordered this product, but it's stuck at customs. Please pay your custom fees and we will deliver the product. And once you have paid the custom duties, then you get another email that you have to pay the environmental tax or insurance fee. Moral of the story, the victim is extorted of more and more money, and the product itself, of course, never arrives. We see that also with investment scams. On the dark web, you can buy what they call donkey list, which is a terrible name, but those are people who fell victim to a scam, especially with crypto and investment. And those details are traded, and other scammers then approach, sometimes the same scammer, but they approach the victim again with, hey, we saw you invested in this company. We were able to retrieve your money. You only have to pay this administration fee to get your money back. And it's the same as with the delivery scams. The victim is lured into spending more and more money while thinking he can get his money back, which of course he will not. Who gets scammed? There the answer is very easy. We did a survey amongst 5,000 consumers. Anybody can get scammed. With a PhD degree to no degree at all, everybody, I think, in his life will fall at least once for a scam, unfortunately. And the reason is very simple. We are continuously bombarded with scams. We even don't notice that we get a phishing email every day. We just delete it. And those phishing emails are often not meant for us. I mean, they're with spelling errors, they're from a Gmail address, but they're sent out to 100,000 people and very cheaply. And that's the strength of many of these scams. They blast text messages, they blast emails, and they know that in the end, 1 to 2% does pay, and that is more than enough money to continue the scam. What is interesting to notice is it used to be mainly elderly people who fell for scams. That is, however, changing rapidly. We see now in the last 2 years that actually young people get scammed more. They're more present on the internet, and they're also slightly less careful. And it goes that far that the benefits of a totalitarian regime is that there were so many students losing money in China that the government enforced that all the college students had to follow a anti-scam training because 10% lost money in only 1 year time. The challenge with scams is that consumers in general are very confident that they are able to recognize scams. In our survey amongst 5,000 consumers, 76% of all the consumers said, we are able to identify scams. Unfortunately, of those interviewed, 73% admitted having fallen for a scam in the past. So there's a huge gap between the confidence level and the reality. We also see that scammers are going pro. We see that in Nigeria and several other African states, but also in Southeast Asia, people are actually being kidnapped or forced to work in labor camps. They get a script in front of them and they are ordered to scam people. And that's a recent development that the heavy criminals are really professionalizing the scam industry. We also see that you can now buy a scam as a service. Scammers are professionalizing in specific kinds of scams. They are developing websites which look like investment banking websites. And unless you're really into the market, you cannot recognize these. Or we see that they're specializing in getting all your personal information and then selling it on the dark web or laundering money. Some scammers are very smart. For example, the International Financial Market Relations Regulation Center is a website which has certified 50 companies as being legit online traders and investment brokers. Surprisingly, we consider all these 50 websites very, very, very high risk. And actually, we think that a scammer might have set up this website to build more trust amongst its victims. We see that scams are actually becoming unrecognizable. We came across the Financial Control Service of Granada website, which is an incredible boring website with all kinds of documents about policy and minutes of meetings, but also one website with board decisions where they state that we were able to get money back from a certain investment scam. And then the victim gets an email saying, hey, the Financial Control Service of Granada was able to recover your money. Please contact us. And you guess it, you first have to pay an administration fee to get your money back. We also see that new technologies are being used to falsify information. This is a ID generator. It costs you £9 to create any ID, a UK driver's license, an American passport, a Dutch ID card. For £9, you've got it. And it's made real time with all the information you enter. We also see that especially romantic dating scammers are using artificial intelligence to create unique photos of people who do not exist. So the old trick of checking, hey, is this photo already used by somebody else, is replaced by new technology where you cannot see if the person actually exists or not. You cannot find them off the web. And this is an example of a scammer using augmented reality to fake a person. So we see that even the latest technology is very quickly implemented by scammers to scam victims, and it's really becomes impossible to recognize. So to summarize, we believe that scammers are currently winning. The online market has been growing for years, and only now the government is taking action. Well, already in 2000, we could have seen that the global market is digitalizing, and of course, crime is also digitalizing. Online crimes are very cheap to set up, and the chances of getting arrested are very, very low. In the UK, as I said before, 41% of all reported fraud cases are all cases are now related to online fraud, but only 2.5% of all these cases are prosecuted. Worldwide, that figure is even much lower. An estimate of the World Economic Forum says that about 0.05% of all cyber criminals are actually being prosecuted, not necessarily being caught, but prosecuted. So how can we turn the tide on scams? We see that many governments and other organizations are focusing very much on building scam awareness, which I think is a good thing. But recent research has proven that building awareness does not decrease victimization. We see that because a consumer or citizen is more aware of scams, they also start to behave differently and maybe overconfident. So as a result, still they can fall for scams, especially as these scams are becoming more and more professional. There's also been a large push towards pushing organizations to do Know Your Customer, KYC. A Danish registry, the owner of the .dk domain name, for example, enforced that people should show an ID if you want to have a Danish domain name. And that reduced the number of online shopping scams with 85% in 1 year. However, and very honestly, I'm sorry to say, as a April Fool joke, we registered the company Scam Advisor Coin with Companies House recently. we used as names of the directors Bernie Madoff and Charles Ponzi, which are both dead and well-known scammers. And we got approved within seconds. So we were able to launch a company listed in the UK offering a cryptocurrency investment where you would get 100% of your investment back within 10 days. So KYC is nice, but at the moment it's not solving the problem. What we did during our last summit last year, and you're very much invited to our next summit, is define concrete solutions on how we can fight scammers better. And we have received more than 200 ideas during our summit, which we boiled down into 10 concrete recommendations, from raising awareness, not just by a bank or by a government, but on a national level, continuously and unified, meaning from kindergarten until the elderly home, and on a continuous basis, not once per year. And other recommendations include making online reporting easier, which actually the UK is doing a very good job at, but also building towards an international scam investigation and prosecution network. Because as Andy was already saying, 85 to 90% of all scams are done by criminals which are across the border, and at the moment they simply cannot be caught. What can we do together? And with that, I will finish. Gaza and Scam Advisor, we work together with more than 100 partners to share data on scams and making scams more visible. So please feel free to use our data if you like. We collect more than 1 million scammy domain names every month, and we're very happy to share with you to protect your employees, your users. Please also share any scams or phishing with us so that we can warn consumers across the world. And please feel free to join the Global Anti-Scam Alliance as an individual or as a company to join our fight for scams. And with that, Andy, I would like to thank you for having me, and I'm giving back the floor to you. Thank you very much.
George, thank you very much indeed. I'm sure everybody else is going to want to do exactly what I'm doing, which is to quite literally applaud your work, not just what you've presented tonight, but what you've been doing for many, many years. I'm so pleased that we are now connected, because there is a tremendously strong alignment between your passionate sense of purpose and ours, George. That's wonderful. Now, our next speaker is going to be Diane Bentley. Before Diane actually launches into what she's going to talk about, we're going to be playing a video. But before we get to the video, I just want to invite anybody that's itching to ask a question or make a comment in relation to what George has said to do so. So please raise your hand either digitally or literally, wave something at me if you want to come in with a comment or a question following what George has just been talking about. Does anybody want to do that? We've got quite a few people here, so I'm needing to go to gallery view to make sure I can see everybody. Wave something at me if you want to. Otherwise, I'm going to ask George one question myself, then we're going to go to Mr. Stephen Barker. George, my question for you is this. So the idea of your algorithms and your web analysis tools indicating a likelihood or a probability that a website might be fake or dodgy, yeah? How do you protect yourself from companies saying, hey, you're defaming me, stop it? How do you defend yourself against that?
Yes, we get a few emails per day with exactly what you're saying. We have a very clear process. We always email back, thank you very much for your email. Would you mind sharing your company registration with us? 8 out of 10 emails we never hear back. So that's 80% gone. Then of those 20% left, we are sometimes wrong. Recently, I had a very nice elderly lady who started an online store selling knitting wear. But we had given her website a very low trust score, because on that we found cryptocurrency and adult content. And what was the case is she had an Indian developer develop it, and they often copy-paste websites. So in the code, we found all kinds of signals which had nothing to do with knitting wear. Wow. And we explained it to her, we fixed the trust score, problem solved. And in some cases, we have to explain to the person contacting us that if you are offering a return on investment of 20% per week, we consider you a very high risk. And we do keep the trust score low. Knock on wood, but until now we never ended up in court because we do reply to emails very quickly. If we are wrong, we correct it. If we think we're right, we start a debate. And sometimes we get nice letters where at the bottom of the letters it says legal template free to use. So it's a continuous struggle, but until now we survived.
Very good, very, very good. Very, very good indeed. I'm always extremely impressed with your knowledge and your depth of knowledge, George. Thank you. We're going to go to Mr. Stephen Barker, whose knowledge also impresses me continuously. Stephen, please put your point to George. Thank you.
George, thank you very much for that presentation. I mean, it's absolutely frightening at one level, but at another level, it's great to see that somebody is looking at it. And I was very impressed with the observation about Denmark. One of the arguments that we've heard put to us, particularly by Anthony Stansfield, who's a former elected police, what's the title, Andy?
Crime Commissioner.
Crime Commissioner, thank you, which is a position in the UK system. And the point that is made is that until law enforcement and the political class get it in their head that they have to intervene, these numbers will not change. And so my question of your good self is, how on earth did anyone persuade the Danes to do something effective? Who was advising them? What was the change of culture within their regulatory system that said, we don't know if this is going to work, but we recognize we have to do something? Because at the moment in the UK, there's no recognition of actually there's a problem. There's no willingness to intervene. There's absolutely no political will whatsoever to attack institutions such as our banks, who are central to the actual movement of money that you've been talking about. The scammers can scam all day long, but if the money never arrives, it's a bit of a waste of time. So therefore, the banking system is quite critical to them. So I just wondered if you had any insights with regard to that.
Yeah. In Denmark, it was actually the Danish government who requested to the registry, the owner of the .dk domain name, to change policy because the number of online shopping scams was huge. So the request did come from the government. Very honestly, Stephen, I know the UK has a lot of scams, but compared to other countries, you are not doing a bad job. I know there is a lot of criticism, rightly so, but the UK is still leading the way in also fighting scams. So don't give up hope.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, George. I can see hands have gone up from Paul and Nigel. We'll go to Paul very, very quickly, then Nigel very, very quickly. I want to keep us to time. So please allow me to be a bit of a bully in terms of timekeeping, folks.
No one else ever gets a quickly or be succinct.
Paul, over to you. Go on.
Yeah, great presentation, George. I think I'm interested to know what sort of response you get when you approach, or you mentioned you refer matters to sort of City of London Police. Are they generally receptive, or is there any evidence that they've acted upon the intelligence you've provided?
We do get data from the London City Police, especially from PIPCO, the how should I say, fake product websites. We have been discussing for a very long time further cooperation, and very honestly, that's going slowly.
Yeah, that's much more in keeping with the kind of response that we get whenever we report anything to City of London Police. But but generally, good show, really good show, good stuff.
Well, thank you very much. What Paul's just spoken about there, the unresponsiveness of some of the agencies is a key issue. It really is. Thanks, Paul. Mr. Nigel Cairns, also as succinctly as you can, please, Nigel, because we're next going to go to Sue Flood, and then we're going to go to Diane Bentley. Nigel.
Okay, just very quickly, I noticed you had a list of your partners. And I think one of them I spotted as Which, another was the City of London, but I don't think I spotted the FCA as being a partner. Have they approached you at all, or have you had any dealings with the FCA about sharing knowledge or becoming a partner?
Very honestly, I do not know. We are very happy that we can cooperate with the other two companies, organizations you named. I don't know. We have not been in. We don't have a cooperation yet with the FCA. We would love to, of course.
We might be able to try to facilitate that, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. Thank you, Nigel. A great question. Can we please do two things, folks? Can we applaud to say thank you to George again, and also to welcome Sue Flood, who, by the way, is somewhere on the other side of the world to normal, and it's about 3:30 in the morning where she is, and it's her birthday tomorrow. So talk about commitment, folks. That is truly, truly outstanding. So thank you, George, and welcome Sue Flood. Sue, please introduce yourself and share with us what you'd like to. Thank you, Sue. Thanks, George.
Hi, everybody. Great presentation, George. Thanks, Paul, for asking that. That was going to be one of my first questions, because given that we've all been trying to communicate effectively and give regulatory bodies this side, in particular in the ARC pension scam case, which, by the way, is 9 billion minimum losses for pension scams in this country. That's an estimate. We've been fighting for this now to show the links, the charts I have, various bodies that have all participated in bringing down and decimating elderly pensions. That of, in particular, normally has a global connection, and there seems to be a lot of people working in silos and not together. Top-down regulatory failures have been at the heart of this living hell for many of the people on this side. It's 11 years in my case, continuously fighting to get some justice. Specifically in my case as well, I called what my seeding providers, which were the BBC, prior to any government intervention, to voice concerns over the validity of my scheme. I've found in my subject access request paperwork, that's from my previous employer, for those that don't get that. They clearly themselves, due to my concerns, rang up the dishonest people to check that the scheme was okay, who okayed it, and then they rang up HMRC, who also okayed the scheme, even though this scheme was under investigation. So the people that found the time to check if we were being scammed actually said it was okay. Additionally, the scheme being under investigation, that of this and 150 others, connected parties, connected names, connected links. There's been no admission from HMRC or any other regulatory body that we've approached. That's the Serious Fraud Office, City of London Police, the FSA, the FCA, the HMRC, who failed to want to discuss anything, and the pension regulator, who I met with in 2015, 2014, who admitted that they'd referred the same name individuals to the FSA back in 2011, 2012. There's been no warnings to any victims under these schemes from any parties that were under investigation. And the result has been that HMRC have in fact punished those individuals and bullied them for 11 years now, issuing large tax tribunal bills, large bills that include 8% interest per annum on the 11 years outstanding, also penalties. Given the total amount of these schemes and the same name perpetrators all reported to the regulators mentioned, my view is that this is a cover-up of great magnitude, whilst blaming the victims who have attempted to try to find some cross-border place to lodge the complaint and get some resolution. I gave my charts and evidence to the Parliamentary Committee back in 2015, 22, I believe. And to be honest, it's not helped, although it was a great effort by Mr. Timms to conclude any abuse of human rights, basic human rights that have, I believe, been stepped all over in these years. As I say, I'm now of the position that I think this is a huge cover-up, and that's where I'm at from my place. Sorry if I'm not cohesive, it's really difficult at 3:30 in the morning. Thank you for listening and taking the time.
Sue, thank you very much indeed. You really are an absolute treasure for the cause, Sue. You really, really are. So I highly recommend you go to sleep now, okay? But I'm
I
pleased
just
to
want
tell
to
you,
listen to Diane, if that's
yeah,
okay, and then I'll get off.
I'm pleased to tell you we've made kind of a connection with Carly Barnes and Ben Reeves, both of whom are doing stuff in the HMRC Are Being Naughty space. I'll tell you more about it as soon as I can, Sue. But
Super.
the fight
Thank you,
goes on,
Andy,
Sue.
as always. I'm just going to sit this out to hear Diane, and then I'll be off. Thank you to
Okay.
everybody, and
Thanks,
have a great evening, I think. Okay.
Thank you. Good luck with your birthday and your daughter's wedding. Thanks, Sue.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. All right, folks. I'm going to share my screen and try showing a video that Diane Bentley very kindly shared with me the other day. I've looked at it. I think it does a remarkably good job of highlighting some of the issues relevant. So I'm going to be playing this video. It's called Auntie Joan's Debacle, Expat Pensions Alert, Hidden Fees Costing Global Pensioners Millions. Of course, there are many different types of pension scams. That was a point that was made very, very well by George when he spoke. And some of them are from out and out criminals, where there's no legitimacy whatsoever to them. Some of them involve recognized, established, sometimes even very, very big organizations who might be doing things that might cause you to stop and wonder. So this particular video, it's about 8 or 9 minutes. So make yourselves comfortable, sit back, enjoy it, listen to it. And then after it's been played, we're going to go to Diane, who'll introduce herself and share the additional points she wants to. So I'm hoping you can see this all. Here we go. The volume's going to be reasonably good, but you might need to tune in a little bit. Okay, so here we go, folks. That's good.
Hello, I'm a pension economist. As a consumer advisor, I'm here to alert you to the exorbitant fees unknowingly paid by expats on their pension schemes. If you are not careful, hidden fees can devour between 25 and 50% of your pension savings. That's a scary thought. Many expats simply don't understand the fees they are being charged because they are intentionally disguised and hidden. From studying pension schemes most of my life, often one or all of these three conditions exist. 1. Fees are simply not disclosed and no one knows to ask. 2. Fees are hidden in a web of internal structures, portfolios, or special purpose vehicles. 3. Sign-up documentation is deliberately made complex because most people are too embarrassed to ask, what does this mean? How much am I paying? Let me give you an idea of what happens. We would like you to meet Auntie Joan. She just retired to her beloved Hermanus home after 45 years of non-stop working. She has transferred her pension into an STM QROPS recommended by a consultant for a company called De Vere Group. They're a good example because they claim to be the world's largest independent international financial consultancy, providing expert advice to expatriate clients and investors around the globe. She is ecstatic as she has transferred her pension out of the UK and should get her pension payments free of tax in South Africa. But Auntie Joan receives her first year statement from the De Vere Group. She is stunned. Her portfolio has underperformed the market by some 4%. Auntie Joan then decides to look at her affairs more closely to understand what happened. So she goes through the documents received from the De Vere consultant once again, but this time with a friend who is a chartered accountant. She looks at the STM documents and then reviews the shareholders of STM. What does she learn? Apparently, Nigel Green, the owner of De Vere, is also a shareholder of STM besides being a shareholder in De Vere. This was never disclosed to her, though she probably didn't think to ask. But now, she's more worried because it seems that this is a conflict of interest. A further review sees her STM QROPS investment being invested into an entity called Providence Life, a Mauritian regulated life company. But she doesn't understand what Providence Life does. She didn't think that she had bought any insurance that she knows of. Auntie Joan, with a friend, do even more research. She learns that the majority shareholder in the Providence Life Company is again this Nigel Green, the CEO and owner of De Vere. Poor Auntie Joan now questions whether there is something fishy going on. As she digs deeper to understand the underperformance of her portfolio, she is horrified to learn 0.75% per annum is being paid to STM, Mr. Green, as trustees' fees in addition to 2.75% that was paid to Providence Life as an initial fee to enter into a portfolio. However, when they look deeper, it appears that Providence Life actually doesn't do anything but charge fees. She then sees above all this, marketing fees can be charged, but the amount of the fees is not disclosed. Unluckily for her, a friend explains, the marketing fees disclosed are likely to be the exit fees disclosed. If she withdraws early, this is 8%, reducing by 1% each year over 8 years. However, further research shows that the 9% is taken from the portfolio on the investment date. This is a cash payment to cover life cover expenses. This life cover costs 1% and then a marketing fee of 8% is paid out to a De Vere related entity as an initial fee. 8% of the amount of £100,000. So what has Auntie Joan learned? So far, from an initial investment of £100,000, the following amounts have been deducted by De Vere and Mr. Green. £750 for trustees' fees, £2,750 as initial fees, £8,000 to cover marketing expenses, and £1,000 to cover life cover costs. At the end of year one, a total of £12,500 has been deducted from her investment. Not surprisingly, poor Auntie Joan is horrified. But this is not all. The De Vere consultant has also suggested that 50% be invested into notes to give some income and capital protection and 50% into 2 mutual funds, a Goldman Sachs portfolio and a GAM fund. Suddenly, Auntie Joan realizes the following. A 4% fee has also been taken as note fees. This has been paid to yet another De Vere entity by the note provider, and another 2% has also been paid to another De Vere entity for a total of £2,625. In addition, on the 2 mutual funds, there is an initial fee of 5% paid to a De Vere entity and a 1% annual management fee to a De Vere entity for a total of £2,625. So Auntie Joan realizes that at least £18,500 has been paid out as fees, nearly 20% of her total investment. And this is year one. It has taken her 45 years to save £100,000, and yet £18,500 is taken in year one from a portfolio, all as fees to a De Vere Group company. She wonders, how many people are in the same situation? It's clear. Now she can work out why her portfolio has underperformed. Auntie Joan calls her consultant. He's left and she speaks to someone who promises to look into her issues. 2 weeks later, she still has not received a response. She phones him again and he says he's waiting for head office to come back to him. 2 weeks later, she phones again and the consultant denies that these are the fees charged. Auntie Joan sends him her calculations. She's then contacted by a De Vere legal officer who states the fees are all disclosed and there is nothing wrong. She then sends copies of all her papers to the Financial Services Board. What does Auntie Jones's experience suggest? It's your money. Be an informed investor and follow these 3 steps. 1. Ask about all fees. 2. Ask about all fees. And 3. Ask about all fees. Get your answers in writing. Smart investing begins with smart questions and full disclosure.
Diane, thank you so much for suggesting we take a look at that. It really does get a particular message across remarkably powerfully. We'll obviously be circulating the link to it for those who want to watch it again. That was very powerful, Diane. Diane, could you please take a moment to very, very briefly talk about yourself, if you don't mind, and share with us whatever else you'd like to. Thanks, Diane. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm Diane Bentley, and really, I suffered the exact same as that video that you've just seen. 2 of the same companies, but one a different one. But in essence, that's exactly what happened to me. And it happened in France. And after 31 years in the health service, I gave up my NHS defined benefits pension because of the bad advice that they gave. I mean, basically, I was put into a cure ops, just like on the video, which was not only just an unsuitable product, but it's a really expensive vehicle, as you can see, to put your pension in. As a result, they've possibly halved my pension as it would have been in the NHS. So it's quite a significant reduction that's happened to me. I did complain and I joined an action group to warn others. And as a result, I've been threatened by lawyers. I've been intimidated by the CEO and the company, and I've actually appeared in court in France as well. The case was dismissed on technicalities, but in addition to all those pension losses, I'm also out of pocket to having to defend the case. The video, as you can see, it's a really helpful video and it does explain it terrifically. But no one is questioning the legalities of what is happening. It is legal, believe it or not. Very unethical and immoral, but it is legal. So I think that's something that we need to get over. And all I want to do is try and warn people, please get those charges in writing. And to be honest, even doing that, we've got fund manager fees that aren't showing on what's happened to us. So that's the situation as it is. I think the thing is Louise Baxter Scott, is she here tonight, Louise?
Louise is going to be with us at roughly 7:15.
Oh, right, because one of the big things is the vulnerability of UK citizens abroad. So, we'll be really interested to listen to what she's got to say. But it's no coincidence that these key players are all hiding between multiple jurisdictions. And I think that's the big thing that we've got to get out. And I'm sure if Sue's still there, she totally agrees as well. We've got trustees that are in one jurisdiction. We've got product providers in a second, investment fund managers in a third, and then clients and advisors who could be in the fourth jurisdiction or even in yet another one. The jurisdiction issue is a massive thing. And as a result of that, there's no proper redress for victims. The players will either refuse to engage with the unhappy customer, saying that their case is without merit, or they basically, all three of them, point a finger at each other and say that it's not us, it's them. You know, the commissions that were taken out for the GAM funds with us, which were extremely risky, these notes, we weren't told about that. We weren't told about the fund managers' fees at all. And all the insurance company says is, well, you know, De Vere should have told you. Well, they didn't. You know, so what are they going to do about it? And the answer is nothing, providing the company is registered. That is all that they care about. We've also found that the regulators in Guernsey, Malta, the Isle of Man, rarely find against them. And these MOUs, these memorandums of understanding that we understood that the European countries have, are just a joke. There is no memorandum of understanding at all. And the Irish Ombudsman, I did complain to the Irish Ombudsman, and she came back and said that Curios was so complex that she couldn't deal with it, and that the only thing that she could suggest is that we took them to court. It's just crazy, you know. I mean, how can people afford to take companies like that to court? I mean, we've got one guy now taking someone to court, taking some trustees to court in Guernsey, and I think he's up to nearly £500,000. You know, we can't afford that. We shouldn't have to pay that either. There should be some redress, you know, that we can go to, and ideally not 5 jurisdictions as a result. Also, the players, they all know that the only way that they're going to be held accountable is through the legal process. And this will not only take years, but it'll cost more than the victim can afford. I mean, basically, the victim is stuck. You know, that there is no redress. We find that the offshore advisors, they control trust money and have got zero accountability. And that's even to the trustees. They've no accountability whatsoever. And I truly believe that this will become one of the biggest scandals that we've seen. You know, forget PPI and the rest of them. So HMRC and the FCA, they've failed us too. They know what's happening to the pensions of UK citizens because we tell them, we send them the information. You know, we believe that it's the FCA's job to protect consumers. It's not our job, but yet it's us collecting information and trying to warn UK citizens what to watch out for. You know, we shouldn't be having to do that. And most of the time, the FCA fail to respond at all, or if they do, it's the usual, thank you very much for your information. We may or we may not investigate it. And even if we do investigate it, we're not going to tell you the outcome. Now, what help is that? It's ridiculous. I've got evidence that they've hidden documents that I've sent them. I've now got a complaint to the commissioner, the complaints commissioner, because they say they've not got emails that I know very well they've got. And not only that, they've used those emails to answer a complaint. You know, it's just ridiculous. And then I've also researched the complaints commissioner, and it seems that £100 voucher is the common compensation for the FCA either being tardy, getting in touch with you, or not responding at all. I mean, it's a joke. And I know it's going to be a joke, but I still have to put that complaint in. And I suppose just to finish is, we can't understand why the FCA and the government doesn't seem to mind that UK pensions are leaving the country and ending up in the coffers of these organisations. You know, why are they so dismissive of UK citizens being, you know, certainly impoverished and possibly needing state support in the future? So we just don't understand that. You know, no, we don't. So I think that's it. That's all I've got to say. Well, I could go on all night, but
Diane, thank you.
We'll resume another evening.
Diane, thank you so much. Diane Folks runs a really good Facebook group, all kinds of people working collaboratively to try to make the changes happen that we need. Diane, please do, if you want to, put a link to your Facebook group in the chat. Thank you again very much indeed, Diane, for sharing the video, which I think a lot of people would have got a lot out of. It really is quite spectacular how the fees on top of fees on top of fees
Just layers and
eat
layers.
into people's values. It's great that you have a philosophical mindset, and it's also great that you want to be part of the solution and helping everyone to work together. You do that brilliantly. Before we go to Paul, who's put his hand up, let's please show our appreciation to Diane for her input today. And remember, Diane's experiences have been very, very hard. You know, it's been damn difficult. Diane and many other victims will be the first to tell you that. They've walked a very, very long, tricky road, trying to stand up rather than stand by, trying to fight back in a civilized and ethical and professional way, and it's not easy. And I should mention this. I'm going to mention this, whether I should or not. Diane and others have been trying to get Parliament, the MPs in our Parliament, to take notice of the fact that there's evidence to suggest that one of the advisory firms giving advice to the politicians themselves does not have a spectacular track record. I'm not going to say any more than that. What I'm going to do is go to Paul Carlier. After Paul, we're going to go to Ben Rees and Carly. Carly's just arrived. We're going to go Paul Carlier, then Carly, then Ben. It will be in that order, okay? Paul, please share your thought. Thank you very much indeed.
I mean, literally, I can just echo everything that Diane's just said. The whole experience of going through that entire hierarchy of oversight. And Andy, you're aware, I've recently made an application for judicial review against the FCA, the Complaint Commissioner and the Information Commissioner, the entire hierarchy of oversight, and with an application for cost capping order on the basis that it's quite clear that all three have sought to exhaust the free statutory processes that they're supposed to provide, that all involve honest and objective review of your complaints, and all of which are rights afforded you by law, but all of them have exhausted those free processes without providing anything like that, and invariably to avoid being held accountable for their own failures, or in that case or in multiple cases. And once knowing full well that if they exhaust that process, the Complaint Commissioner will do likewise, the Information Commissioner likewise, leaving you with no alternative but expensive litigation. And I had a quote to bring the judicial review to pay a good law firm to do it, £300,000. So, and each one of those parties, each went, right, that's it, no more. If you want to take us on, you go to court at your own expense and we will fight it. So they all want to be in a position where they can leverage costs, and it's all to prevent accountability. And this is one of the problems everybody has. And it's not until I blew the whistle to the FCA in 2015, thinking, oh, this is the way to go, they'll do a good. And I've shared this experience, and so many whistleblowers have shared the same experience, that it's not until you make the disclosure that you realise that you're not only potentially exposing the people that you witnessed do the wrongdoing, there's a very high probability that you are also exposing the regulator, because it stands to reason that the regulator either knew this was going on and had turned a blind eye, or should have known this was going on and hadn't detected it. Either way, they're potentially exposed and or embarrassed, and immediately you are actually without realizing you're in the battle. You're actually potentially exposing these people there, and then you're banging your head against a brick wall, wondering why the hell they're not doing anything. So the whole, and the problem is as well is where they've done this to one complaint in the past, like Diane, and there's no way yours is a unique complaint. Similar complaints would have been said, they would have been dealt with equally poorly, or they dropped the ball, and therefore that dropping of the ball on previous complaints means that the outcome of any new complaints or future complaints is already predetermined, because they're exposed and conflicted. We've got a situation, I don't know how many are familiar with the Blackmore bond, but as soon as Andrew Bailey and the FCA senior management realised in August 18 that they had dropped the ball in March 2017 by not looking or acting on my reports, that's it. Okay, we're now exposed or embarrassed. So instead of picking the ball up, they'll just bury the ball and bury the victims along with it. And this is happening not just in the UK, but elsewhere as well. And all these other regulators, as you say, none of them can be this incompetent. And how can you have a regulator that says, oh, it's a bit too complex for us? I mean, bloody astonishing. absolutely astonishing. So I'll leave it there. I could go on all night, Andy, you know, but
Paul, thank you so much. Your input, as always, is first class. And may I please once again thank Diane, George, and Sue for superb input tonight. Well, Ian V just put his hand up. Ian's a great volunteer for TTF. He's doing some amazing work behind the scenes in relation to data putting together around the revolving door problem. Ian, please do tell everybody a little bit about yourself and then share your point. Thanks, Ian. Thank you.
I come from a slightly different background to many on this, Bob. My background is product development, and primarily product development and life assurance, including some cross-border stuff. And I think that the thing that always frightens me most, particularly around these QROPS pension scams, and let's be honest, you could argue it's all legal, but it is to an extent a scam here because charges are hidden, and these were never designed to be good value. When you look through it, I mean, we'd never work. There's too many charges, and the charges, you need a miracle to get a reasonable return. I think the thing that scares me most on this is always, when the QROPS regime was extended and when pensions freedoms came in, legislators and regulators were told by many across the industry this was a disaster waiting to happen. So there might be some valid reasons, but there was risk everywhere, particularly on QROPS, which initially was designed probably very fairly with HMRC to ensure that someone who might have worked a few years in the UK and then went to work somewhere for most of the rest of their working life could amalgamate their pensions instead of having a small amount stuck in the UK. And as soon as we started to extend it, I think a large number of people across the industry said, this is, once it's gone beyond that core purpose, this is a danger area waiting to happen. And to an extent, what happened is HMRC didn't put any guide rails around it. When we saw pension freedoms introduced by legislators, the government didn't put any guide rails around it. And that's where I think the big problems are, and probably where the problems are going forward with the next scam and the next bad thing, is that, when you don't react to what you're being told by people who sort of know what's going on, you're on the hook as much as the sort of the less than ethical investment advisor or life assurance company or trustees. And I wonder at times if that's why we know we've dropped the ball, so we're not going to admit that in any big way. But I'd also go back, I think government is as guilty as the various regulatory authorities, and on pension scams, HMRC really is at the sort of bottom of a lot of these problems.
Ian, the point you just made, in particular HMRC, I've got a feeling might get mentioned by Carly and Ben in just a short while. Ian, I absolutely concur with what you've set out, and it really is quite remarkable having a very well-respected industry person like Ian tell it as it is like that. Ian, thank you very, very much indeed. I'm going to share my screen before we go to Carly. So you'll know that I mentioned earlier the all-party parliamentary group that the Transparency Task Force is very proud to be associated with. It's working hard on all kinds of issues relating to the sorts of things we're talking about. There's another all-party parliamentary group that is doing some absolutely superb work. This is the investment fraud all-party parliamentary group. It's hyper relevant to everything we're talking about today, folks. It really, really is. And I had the true pleasure of a wonderful conversation earlier today with Carly, who I'm incredibly impressed with. I'll be very frank about it. Carly, please take yourself off mute, introduce yourself and tell everybody a bit about how you got involved in all this space and what this APPG is focusing on. I'm very, very confident, Carly, that the all-party parliamentary group that we are involved with is going to want to support your work as much as possible, because we are pulling on the very same rope. Carly, over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to the conversation and for our call earlier today. Apologies, first of all, if there's any background noise. I've got an 8-year-old and a dog in the background I've just got to keep an eye on, so apologies in advance. My background is I'm a lawyer by trade, and my husband is a victim of investment fraud. He's a former professional footballer and has lost virtually all his career earnings and the majority of his savings through, sadly, through investment fraud. And if that wasn't bad enough, the problems which I'm sure many of you will empathise with. It's been dealing with systemic failure. One of the biggest issues has been HMRC and what we believe are, incredibly unfair tax charges, in relation to which my husband had absolutely no benefit, and HMRC are refusing to look at the perpetrators and all the people who've committed all the wrongdoing. As a result, myself and Ben has been absolutely wonderful for us. Ben's a lawyer and dual qualified financial advisor. He's been helping myself and my husband to unravel our particular case, and I set up a voluntary action group for fellow players who, along with my husband, were in the same situation and suffering for some terrible issues. We've had suicide attempts, loss of homes, marital breakdowns, all things I think anybody who's been in this situation can identify with. We decided that we wanted to do something about this, not just to try and help resolve our own situation, but we don't want to see other families going through this. We want to try and create a reform. So we co-founded the APPG on investment fraud. It's been acting very much under the radar for the last couple of years. We've been doing a lot of research, bringing lots of good people on board, trying to ascertain where the problems are. And our first sort of touch point, if you like, is creating a campaign for fair tax for fraud victims. So I reached out to Andy because I felt that it may be something we can collaborate on. I'm sure there's pension liberation, fraud victims in similar circumstances. So we're going to hold an inquiry, an APPG inquiry, so that we can hear directly the evidence of who's affected, what the impact has been. And what we hope is that the profile of the people that we've got involved will really try and help put this, into a higher profile effectively. And we need to show that fraud doesn't discriminate. This is something that everybody needs to be very much aware of, that there's failures on multiple levels, whether it's the regulator, law enforcement, but HMRC for us has been the real killer blow, really, on top of everything else, is having to deal with tax charges and bankruptcies and loss of homes for something which the victims themselves haven't benefited from. So the inquiry is going to take place this month. We've got some really, really good people involved, KCs, former commander of City of London Police, some very good supportive MPs. And really, it's just about collaborating and gaining as much support as we can, and working at what solutions might look like across the board for fraud victims. I think at the moment, our view is that HMRC are picking off individual groupings and looking at specifics in relation to each case, rather than looking at the broad issue of why is there not currently a fair policy when dealing with investment fraud of whatever nature. So I hope I haven't rambled too long, but that in essence is where we're coming from, and just really trying to do something that not only will help ourselves, but will help others and will help future generations.
Kylie, that's been a superb scene setter for the work that you and your APPG does. I know I'm repeating myself, but I would like to enthusiastically find a way of working collaboratively, because the issues you're concerned about are exactly the same issues that we are concerned about as well, Kylie. That was perfect. Thank you very, very much. Folks, for those of you that don't know, there are people like Sue Flood who for 10, 11, 12 years have had the sword of Damocles hanging over them, because having been a victim of crime, i.e. a pension scam victim, Sue and people like her have then had HMRC chasing after them to say, we know that you're a victim, but we want you to pay us this tax money. It's egregious that it's happened at all. It's egregious that it's been taking 10, 11, 12 years to get to the bottom of. And in all honesty, it seems to me and others that HMRC are a law to themselves. We have to get this stopped. We have to find a way of getting HMRC to treat victims of crime as victims of crime, and that's exactly where Kylie's coming from. Thanks, Kylie, so much. And thank you also for introducing us to Ben. Mr. Ben Rees, please take a moment to introduce yourself, and then as soon as she arrives, we'll be going to Louise back to Scott. But first of all, Mr. Ben Rees, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. I've got a little bit to add, I guess, to what Kylie said. So as she said, my background is in financial services regulatory compliance. I'm an investment fraud lawyer, really, as the day job, and a lot of what Diane and Sue talked about really struck a chord, because we see on a daily basis victims of those types of frauds coming to us looking for answers, and frustratingly we kind of hit the same barriers that particularly Diane mentioned, with jurisdictional issues, problems with regulators or lack of regulation, problems identifying regulated entities. Lots of the fraud that goes on is perpetrated by unregulated individuals who prey on UK consumers, and they often play the fact that they're unregulated, and they use the passporting rules, which are wholly inadequate, etc. So I totally share the frustrations, and as someone who, we have the power to litigate sometimes in these cases, but as everyone said, the cost, the stress, the time, the pressure, it's immense on people who have already fallen victim to scams and frauds, and don't really have anywhere to turn. So those issues are common themes throughout our case. I mean, Carly has summarized our group of victims extremely well, but for me it's the complexity of the frauds that can be perpetrated. We do, in the day job, we do some work around authorized push payment frauds, for example, and these are fairly straightforward frauds. It ties to what George was saying at the start. But these are relatively simple frauds that are perpetrated online. What we've come across in our group is very complicated fraud that involves a serious and long-standing breach of trust. So the victims are, for want of a better word, groomed by sophisticated fraudsters. These aren't people that are picking a pocket. They're grooming their victims into a sense of pure trust, almost blind trust, and then abusing the trust through complicated financial products. And what makes our case particularly difficult, as Carly said, is the resultant tax issues that have, they're the icing on the cake for people who have been wholeheartedly defrauded by people they trusted, only then to find not only has the money gone, but they've got the revenue coming after them for huge sums of money, life-changing sums of money that will effectively bankrupt them and wipe them out. And these are people in their full 40s, 50s and 60s that don't have the time to recover. And as you said, Andy, the victims of crime element has been the theme that we've campaigned for, I suppose, all the way through, that how can it be right that victims of fraud, victims of crime, which in our case, we've got the City of London Police investigating and confirming that this is criminal fraud. These people are then having to, or we're having to, on their behalf, battle with the authorities who should be investigating the fraud, looking at the people that have perpetrated the fraud and taking action. And when they choose not to do that, in light of suicides and serious life-changing welfare issues, not just financial issues, but welfare-related issues, it's staggering, absolutely staggering. And it seems to chime with everything that's been said tonight on this call, that there's just serious, systematic and systemic regulatory failure across the board. And what particularly amazed me is how ineffective and ill-equipped the City of London Police were for a fraud that, whilst it was complicated at times, some of these investment products were complicated. They were unregulated, complicated property type schemes. They were just completely understaffed, under-resourced, with people in there who had no real grip of economic crime, didn't understand fraud, didn't understand how these crimes, the nuances of how sophisticated fraudsters work. And they were looking for the black and white, someone who's picked your pocket type crime, and they didn't understand the mechanics of the fraudulent schemes, which means that when you're then having these discussions with a body like the Revenue, who at times have been looking to the police for information, for help with how these frauds have been perpetrated and how they've been structured, nobody's got a clue. And so it's down to, essentially pro bono advisors trying to help victims of fraud without any real support, which is, it's outrageous and disgraceful. And the end result is, negative on all fronts. There's financial devastation, there's welfare problems, exactly the same as those that Diane mentioned before, and an immense sense of injustice and frustration at the complete lack of cohesion of the authorities and the lack of ability to deal with complex investment fraud, and seeming unwillingness to address it at political level, government level. I think for all the reasons that have been discussed on this call, the fact that these people, as Paul said, are, often you're highlighting the failures of the regulators, of the police, of the people that should be there to protect these victims. And that, I think, is the biggest challenge that we've got. It's certainly the biggest challenge that we've come up against as a group, is how to get the regulatory authorities, the police, the law enforcement bodies to start working together effectively and properly. And that, I think, is what we should be campaigning for.
Ben, absolutely. Ben, Carly, we're on exactly the same way that we really are. It's so great that we're in a position to work together. But Ben just mentioned that the welfare issues, some of you may be aware, we produced a paper last year. We presented it in Parliament, I think it was July. We called it Faces of Financial Crime. I just put a link to it in the chat. It's 22 case studies of people who've simply had life-changing losses and the post-traumatic stress realities as a direct consequence of that. We're going to be going to Louise Baxter-Scott. I've known Louise for a few years. Frankly, one of the most impressive people in this sort of space I've ever had the pleasure of meeting and getting to know. She's motivated, she's serious, she's very, very capable, very, very competent, and I'm bloody glad she's on our side. Louise has volunteered to be part of the panel of experts working on the all-party parliamentaries group, all-party parliamentary groups, call for evidence into the Financial Conduct Authority. Louise, I'm sure you've only been on the call for about 10-15 minutes. I know you've had to do various other things, but you've got a bit of a vibe for what we've been talking about, I'm sure. Louise, please do introduce yourself and share with us what you'd like to around the general topics of fraud and economic crime and protecting vulnerable people and that sort of thing. Thank you very much. And then we'll open up for Q&A. Cheers, Louise. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a lovely introduction. No pressure on me at all. Sorry, I wasn't here for the rest of the meeting. I'd like to say I was doing something glamorous, but I was ferrying my children to their various sporting activities. So that's what I've been doing for the last hour or so. Just listening, I came in about, I suppose, about 7:05 and just listening to what people were saying. I'm Louise Baxter. I'm head of the National Trading Standards Scams team. So I'm one of those enforcement agencies. I'd like to think I'm one of the good enforcement agencies. However, listening to what Ben was saying there, I actually agree with most of the things that you say, which is awkward sometimes when you are one of those law enforcement agencies. We are funded by, it was BEIS, they're not BEIS anymore, it's slightly split off now, and we do get some funding from the Home Office. We're a very small team and our focus is predominantly on victim support, because one of the reasons I get wheeled in at a central government level or to work with the Home Office or with the City of London Police is because we have a very victim-centred focus on everything. Sometimes with fraud, as you'll know, it feels like a victimless crime, and we're not just talking about the financial well-being of consumers who are victims of these awful crimes. We're talking about mental well-being and all the knock-on effects of it. I think somebody on the call said it's grooming, which is, I fundamentally believe it is grooming of adults, and then people are coerced and controlled to provide their financial information and pass their money away, and then they are repeatedly targeted because they're added to what's called suckers lists, and they're repeatedly targeted by organised crime groups. The team that I work in, our main focus is to seize those suckers lists, to identify the victims that are on them so that we can proactively visit them and support them. As I'm sure you all know, 40% of all reported crime is now fraud, but actually we only think between 5 and 15% of people actually report it. Only 1% of law enforcement money is devoted to deal with fraud and crime. We are not going to arrest our way out of this situation. There's not enough money in it, and there's not enough expertise. People don't know how to deal with economic crime or fraud cases. It knocks out whole units for years and years and years with really poor results. That is something that needs to be worked on, but in the meantime, we've got a little bit of a storm that we need to sort out first. With the cost of living crisis, we're seeing consumers and consumer vulnerability. So people, in my opinion, are not vulnerable. It's the situation around them that causes vulnerability, or the marketplace they're trying to engage with. With COVID, we've seen cost of living and COVID causing situational vulnerability, and then loads of new markets springing up, which consumers are not taught or educated on how to engage with effectively or safely. So we've got a massive amount of things that are causing vulnerability at the moment for people, which means everybody's more susceptible to fraud and scams. So we're my team, our role is around sort of championing the victim. We are looking at starting a campaign in the next couple of months called Scam Survivors, because I don't like victims. I think it's disempowering. And we are currently doing a lot of studying and work around the similarity between coercive control in a domestic abuse situation and that fraud situation, to map across, to try and give fraud a little bit more parity with other criminal offences that happen within people's homes, but also trying to work out how we can best provide that support to victims so that we don't victim blame and shame. That first meeting with a victim, that first meeting with somebody that's been a victim or been targeted by a criminal who's trying to defraud them, is the most important one. If we go there with, oh, aren't you silly, or why did you do that? Same as we do with domestic violence, why didn't you leave? You're going to get people disengaging straight away, and then they're more likely to become a repeat victim, or the mental health effects are going to be greater. So if anybody wants to talk to me about any of the work we do or work with us, that would be great. And I'm here for questions. I'm here for a little while for questions if anybody's got any questions for me.
I'm sure there will be for you. And after your piece, we'll move into sort of a general Q&A. Folks, it's about 7:30 UK time. I think we've got people from Australia and Canada, believe it or not, tonight. But UK time, it's 7:30. We'll probably wrap up the whole session by about 7:45. Of course, if you need to disappear before then, please do so. But let's try and have a bit of a general Q&A. Louise, could I just ask you to speak to one point, first of all? Could you share with us, please, your general thoughts on the what more could be done to take the current fraud strategy a few steps further forward? What more could be done to make it stronger?
A couple of bits. There could be a call from government to ensure that we have consistent education messaging. The new Action Fraud is being reviewed at the moment to ensure that we have a consistent reporting approach, and they're trying to review that so that it's better and easier for people to navigate. There's something around consistent messaging, which we don't all provide the same education messages, so none of them land. So people are very confused about what they're supposed to do or what they're not supposed to do. I think there needs to be more pressure on the financial sector, the telco sector, and possibly the tech companies to stop it at source, because what we're trying to do is, in some cases, when people are living with situational vulnerability, expecting people to make complex decisions based on imperfect information, which is just calling for people to be targeted and not get the best outcomes for them in that particular sense. So I think there needs to be more drive from the top. I think the legislation could go further. The new Fraud Reform Act and the fraud strategy. I think that it should have called for a ban on all cold calling, not just in relation to financial services, but they didn't go as far as that. But that's something that we can look at. In my role, I'm not really allowed to lobby, so I have to push it to other people to lobby and then to support with pom-poms from the sidelines. But I'm quite happy to work with people on that.
Fantastic, Louise. Thank you so much. We're going to go to Ben. Ian Neal had his hand up earlier, but I've got a feeling that Ben wants to speak specifically to something that Louise has just said, whereas Ian had his hand up previously, so it may be a more general point. So I hope you understand my logic in going to Ben first, Ian. I do know you had your hand up first. Ben, to you, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Lee. That was super interesting to us because it's a bit of an observation rather than a question. But in our group, we actually had a former accredited financial investigator from Trading Standards working pro bono alongside some pro bono former detectives. And to my earlier point about the failings that we've experienced in law enforcement, the one person who identified the fraud and the offences potentially that had been carried out against the revenue, not just against our clients, if you like, was that chap. And he identified it early on and was adamant that fraud had occurred. He identified it, he set out the crimes, and he was very, very helpful at working out what was going on. And his immense frustration was that he couldn't act on it. And that, you know, he, as a, you know, at the time, an acting law enforcement officer with years, 35 years experience, I think, as an accredited financial investigator, took this around different police forces and got blocked, and didn't get anywhere at times. And it's more of an observation. I don't know why that is. I mean, maybe the question is that something that you know, have experienced, and how do we deal with that you've got excellent people on the ground identifying fraud, but they can't then get that up to the agencies or the people that can actually act on it and do something about it?
Not that it'll make you feel better, but I have a similar problem within my team. So my team we do the international investigations that focus on mail scams and telephone scams predominantly. That's our area. And we have some really particularly big cases, and I don't have enough resource in my team. I can prosecute unwarranted. I can prosecute under something called the Consumer Protection Regulations or under the Fraud Act. We disrupt. We get a lot more bang for our buck in relation to this. I think from a law enforcement perspective, we need to move it on. We need to start thinking about what does it look like now? What's the most effective way to deal with these particular criminals? And that isn't always prosecution, in my opinion. There are lots of ways to skin a cat. And actually, we need to be more innovative in our disruptive tactics. I mean, for example, we stop the mail from getting into the postal system, so it never lands on the doormat. I mean, we don't prosecute those people for sending that mail, but we stop it getting to consumers. So in my eyes, that is a win. We're hurting them in their bank accounts. Every time it comes in a different port, we shut it down, we move it on, and then we seize it, so they don't get it back. We've had just very recently a couple of criminals going, "You're making it impossible for me to trade in the UK." That's amazing. Thank you for that compliment. Thank you very much. That's exactly what we want to be doing. So I think there's some learning around that, and that's something we're trying to push from the Joint Fraud Task Force and from a government level, is that we need to be sharing better practice on what enforcement looks like, and it doesn't have to just be old school. We arrest people and prosecute them, and I think there's something that actually we can look to push that agenda a little bit more. And actually, education and these sort of groups as well, this peer-to-peer support education is one of our biggest arms of defence. I'm not sure that answered your question. I went off on a little bit of a rant then. So
talking about ranting, thank you, Louise. So for those of you that don't know, we now have a concept called the Thursday rant. Okay, so anybody can come to our Zoom on Thursdays at 6 o'clock and rant about something that's really annoyed them during the course of that week. So the Thursday rant, that you couldn't have set that up any better, Louise. Thank you very much. We're going to go to Mr. Ian Neal, who's been very patiently waiting with his digital hand up for a while. Then Mr. Paul Carlier, then Anne-Marie Borg. Mr. Neal.
Thanks, Andy. The point I wanted to make relates to comments that were made earlier about HMRC, for example, pursuing victims for tax charges. I certainly hold no brief for HMRC or in defending any other regulators, but I've been specifically involved in pensions legislation and regulation, watching what was going on, monitoring and analysing it since the late 80s. And there was a fundamental and very important change that was made in 2006, April 2006, with the introduction of the Finance Act 2004, when it came into force. Prior to that, HMRC operated a discretionary regime of governance of pension schemes. That was swept away. HMRC consequently was massively de-skilled because politicians, and they don't get enough blame in this context, in my view, politicians felt that it was possible to encapsulate everything that ever could go on with pension schemes in a framework of legislation. The consequent rigidity of the law removes HMRC's discretion in what they can do. They can ignore their duty, perhaps, but they are legally permitted to pursue victims for these tax charges that you mentioned. It is just one individual example of a fundamental misunderstanding that politicians have about the real world. And pensions is the only area I know much about, but I think it's a good example.
Ian, thank you very much indeed for sharing that insight. You know what, personally, I think that if you were to read HMRC's charter, which is essentially the kind of the vision statement of how they're supposed to behave, and you compare that to the persecutory, I think I might have just made that word up. If it doesn't exist, you'll still get the gist of it. The persecutory approach they take with victims of financial crime, it's absolutely miles apart, absolutely miles apart. Thanks, Ian. Mr. Paul Carley, then we'll go to Anne-Marie Ball. Paul.
Yeah, hi. No, I get a lot of what Louise was saying there about the, if you can, prevention is half of the battle, but I do think prosecutions do add a deterrent. We've got, I mean, I don't know if anyone saw the BBC Panorama programme we did last year on the Blackmore bond and the work we've done on that since. And, we've presented overwhelming evidence to the FCA, the insolvency service in particular, because we've got evidence to prove that it was a Ponzi scheme. Now, we gave them, I did all the digging, laid it all out for them, and they concluded, it was decided in the end they would take no action. But they didn't say they didn't find any evidence or they didn't find there was wrongdoing. And Nicky Rathy repeated this to the Treasury Select Committee, said they concluded not to take any action, implying they found no evidence of wrongdoing, fraud or a Ponzi scheme. Now, we know that what he was trying to imply, and he was asked to specifically say, are you confirming that there was no evidence of wrongdoing, fraud or a Ponzi scheme, when you said that the insolvency service investigating concluded not to take any action? And he replied, you're quite right to say that they concluded not to take any action, and then went off at a tangent, completely avoided the question because he couldn't answer it, because they did find evidence of fraud, wrongdoing and a Ponzi scheme. And the insolvency service literally chose to take no action. They claimed, when I did a freedom of information request, they claimed that, yes, because we don't want to, we won't share information because it might prejudice a police investigation. So I contacted City of London Police. No ongoing investigation to Blackmore bond. So completely dispelling the position of the insolvency service. And Nicky Rathy knew he couldn't say, yes, we found no evidence of fraud or wrongdoing on Ponzi scheme, because he knew I had the evidence to prove that, it was. 31 million's missing, and we've got all the evidence to show that multiple people didn't invest in Blackmore bond. They invested in something else entirely, another Blackmore vehicle that when it matured, they were told they were transferred into Blackmore bond, but no transfer of cash or collateral took place. That is the definition of a Ponzi scheme. We shared that with the insolvency service, and they've buried it. And they've only buried it because the City of London Police were given reports in 2016, the year Blackmore bond launched, about this potential fraud. And I reported Blackmore bond in March 2017. We were in the office next door to the boiler room that was pushing this stuff. I was giving them live verbatim updates and reports, and they were targeting non-sophisticated customers. The bottom line is, the whole Blackmore bond scenario, the insolvency service taking no action, is not because they can't. Got all the evidence, I gave it to them, but the problem is it would expose the FCA and the City of London Police for dropping the ball, and then the Treasury would have to pick up the £46 million tab. So there's and what I've argued, we're relaunching a complaint against the insolvency service on behalf of victims, and we're arguing that basically if you don't disclose it, basically you're just giving every future fraudster the Blackmore bond get out of jail free card, because every fraudster now can say, well, if you didn't prosecute them, you can't prosecute me, because that's how it will play out. And then the insolvency service and everyone else creates another conflict for them. So they can't go after future, protagonists and offenders. It's astonishing. But I do agree, Louise. I think if prevention's everything, but a prosecution, do get some people behind bars doing some hard time does have an effect. The HBOS Reading fraud convictions had a massive effect on the industry. They really did.
I agree. It's just the resource, isn't it? If you've got the resource to chuck it, absolutely.
Well, this is the thing, but I mean, all the agencies been mowing recent, but myself, I mean, we were working with a team of like 10, not blowing our trumpets, but top, financial markets experts, and the FCA, nobody wanted to engage with us. We weren't asking for a penny. We were giving this real-time investigation. We can help you investigate. No engagement, and at the same time, they've been moaning lack of resources. And when
the thing that, sorry, cutting there, Paul, the thing that Paul's talking about right now echoes what Ben was saying earlier. it's remarkably, it seems to be remarkably difficult to get the evidence that people wanted. You know, it's almost as if they have to be force-fed the evidence. We've experienced this in one way or another on many, many, many occasions. And frankly, it does make you feel quite suspicious. Sorry, Paul, I cut you off there as you were finishing off. Just please do finish off, Paul. Thank you. Oh, I think Paul's frozen. Let's go to Anne-Marie Borg. Anne-Marie, please take a moment to introduce yourself. Anne-Marie, thank you.
I'm the head of the Antara project, which is a project about education. And I wanted to pick up about what Lou was mentioning about education. I worked as a counselor for victim support a few years ago, and I was asked to actually go and give some talks to the police cadets in how to actually deal with victims of crime and their first kind of contact with the police. And I was astounded as the lack of knowledge, and I don't think it's changed now. And I think it's one of the issues that we really have to tackle and see how we can actually provide this training and provide this education, which is absolutely indispensable, in particular with these kind of crimes. I was dealing with other types of crimes, but these kind of crimes are almost new in a way, and they're becoming more and more technical. And I think we need to actually look at that and how we can actually make that impression on the police and other bodies as well who are tackling these crimes.
Well said, Anne-Marie. Thank you very, very much indeed for your points, Anne-Marie, and your support behind the scenes with everything that TTF's doing as well. Would anybody else like to come in with anything else before we look to wrap the session up? I'll say a few final words in a moment, but just last chance, folks. I'll go to gallery view so I can see you waving literally if you want to. Jean Hayden, I think, has got a hand up. Jean, please succinctly share your thought. Thank you. Oh, we can't hear you, Jean. You're not on mute, so I think you might be a speaker problem, Jean. I think you're on mute now, Jean. Give it another go. No, we can't hear you. There's a tech problem there. We'll have to pass, Jean. I'm sorry about that. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to come in on? In which case, we'll bring things to a close. So allow me then, if I may, to just kind of attempt to summarize what we've covered. We've, in my opinion, we've had great input from every single one of our speakers. And also thank you to those who've chipped in with comments and questions on the way. George's session was particularly informative. Great to know that he's got two organizations he's leading that's helping to deal with the fraud, crime issues, etc., etc. We had Sue Flood at 3:30 in the morning Australia time talking to us about her life experience and the frustration she's had getting the authorities to work together and effectively. Diane Bentley in France talking about her experiences trying to get sense out of a major international financial institution, trying to get justice, trying to get compensation. Carly and Ben talking about the work of the APPG on investment fraud, which is remarkably well aligned to our areas of interest. And then we had Louise finishing things off, talking about the superb work that her organisation is doing. In summary, we can achieve more together than independently. So let's continue to find ways of identifying the activities that are most likely to make a difference. Let's press on those buttons as hard as we can, and let's just work as passionately as we can to try to bring things to a better end result than where we are right now. Hate to say it, but right now, the UK is known as a global centre of illicit money flows, economic crime, financial crime, dodgy political donations, and all the rest of it. So it's in our collective interest to clean things up, not just for our generation, but of course for our kids and their kids too. We don't want to live in a society that's corrupt. We don't want to live in a society that's riddled with crime. We want to be able to invest safely and prudently. We want our politicians to represent our interests as effectively as possible. We want our regulators to be firm and effective and to step up to the plate when it comes to the consumer protection remit. We want our lawyers to litigate where they can, where the cases are strong enough. There's a lot more that could and should be done, folks. Let's do what we can to make that happen. My final comments, of course, are simply to thank everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for participating. Well done. Great job. We'll pick up on all the momentum that we're continuing to create. Thank you all, especially the speakers. So George, Sue, Diane, Ben, Carly, and Louise, and everybody else that chipped in along the way. We'll wrap it up there, folks. Thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you. Good night. Good night. Cheers all. Good night. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.